Hello friends, we are into the 6th week of our course. The third poet that we have for this week is Louise Gluck, and her poem that we have selected is The Mountain. We will see the objectives, the life and writings of our poet, read two poems, Gratitude, All Hallows, and then discuss The Mountain with reference to the theme, form, language and literary devices. We will also see certain elements of human relationships and reflections on life. Most importantly, we will see the influence of Emily Dickinson on Glück and her writings. Finally, we will see some takeaways from this poem and discussion and conclude our presentation. Let's see the objectives now. To give a brief account of the life and writings of Glück is our first objective. The second objective is to read two of her poems, Gratitude and All Hallows. We will get a broader understanding when we read more than 2 or 3 poems by the same poet. The job that we have for this presentation is to discuss Gluck's poem The Mountain. From this we can try to understand the role of the teacher's responsibility to her students in the classroom. We will also learn to appreciate the use of myths in our life. We will look into the thematic, formal, linguistic and literary aspects of the poem, and finally we will see some dimensions of human relationships and reflections on life in the poem, and as we said earlier, we will also see the influence of Emily Dickinson on Louise Gluck. Here is Gluck's life. Louise Gluck was born in 1943. She is widely considered to be the most talented contemporary American poet, even before she received her Nobel Prize. It is not surprising that she was declared the 12th Poet Laureate of the US in 2003, long before she got this Nobel Prize. Recently in 2020 she received the Nobel Prize, and she has also, in addition to this, received many other awards for poetry and literature. Name any award for poetry, you will see her name there. Her poems are concerned with the themes of loneliness, family relationships, divorce, death, disappointment, rejection, loss and many other dark sides of life. She had the opportunity of teaching at Yale University and many other well-known universities like Stanford University, University of North Carolina and many others. We have a quotation from her which will tell us about her outlook on life. Intense love always leads to mourning, a sense of loss, a sense of broken relationships. So we can see all these things in her poetry. She has primarily written many poetry volumes. Here are some: Firstborn, The House on Marshland, The Triumph of Achilles, The Wild Iris, which won the Pulitzer Prize for her in 1992, Vita Nova, a collection that won her the Burlingame Prize. We also have another volume called A Village Life, published in 2009, and later we have another volume, Faithful and Virtuous Night, which was published in 2014 and that won the National Book Award. These are some of her poetry collections we have mentioned. There are many others. We also have two notable prose collections in 2 volumes, Proofs and Theories, and the second one is American Originality. We can appreciate her American originality when we read more and more of her poems. The first poem that we want to read is Gratitude. It's all about being grateful to life. Whatever life may do to us doesn't matter, just simply we need to be grateful to acts of small kindnesses. Let's read the poem. Do not think I am not grateful for your small kindness to me. I like small kindnesses. In fact, I actually prefer them to the more substantial kindness that is always eyeing you like a large animal on a rug until your whole life reduces to nothing but waking up morning after morning cramped and the bright sun shining on its dust. Small kindness is very small and the substantial kindness is very huge, which is described in so many lines and words. The poet is of course more grateful to small kindnesses. At the same time, she remembers substantial kindnesses as well, that is huge acts of kindnesses, some help, assistance. She always remembers all of them. So one of the ideas from this poem that we have to remember is be grateful to life, be grateful to everything that we have in our life, to air, to water, to shelter, to sunlight, to all the things that are available in our world which help us live our life. The next poem we have is called All Hallows. Hallows means saints or something to do with holiness. We have two stanzas, so we have two slides for this poem. There is a word called cinquefoil, for which we have the example in that flower, that is actually a flowering plant, 5-petaled flowering plant. So I wanted you to see that flower here on the slide. Let's read the poem now. Even now this landscape is assembling, the hills darken, the oxen sleep in their blue yoke, the fields having been picked clean, the sheaves bound evenly and piled at the roadside among cinquefoil as the toothed moon rises. Cinquefoil is one plant that has been brought into the poem, and another thing that we have to notice in this poem is about the moon, the imagery that is used for the moon. It has been described in so many ways, but here the poet looks at it as toothed moon rises. The second part of the poem is here. This is the barrenness of harvest or pestilence. She describes an ordinary event, probably in a rural area. And then she says this is the barrenness of harvest or pestilence. Harvest, something that comes from the land, very useful for the farmer or to people, and pestilence, some disease, some destruction is also there in our life. And the wife leaning out the window with her hand extended as in payment, and the seeds distinct gold calling, come here, little one, and the soul creeps out of the tree. A woman is presented to us against a rural background, and some calling is there, come here, little one, and the soul creeps out of the tree. The whole poem can be metaphorical, saying that the poet has written something and she is asking us, come here, little one, and we participate in the process of reading the poem. Louise Gluck believes that a poem is something with which a reader speaks. It is her own experience, and we can feel it with her poem as well. Now let's go to the poem that we are going to discuss in more detail. The poem is The Mountain. It's a 31-line poem. It was published in the Triumph of Achilles book, which was published in 1985. The whole book is a kind of retelling of Greek mythical stories. And this particular experience presented in The Mountain is probably from Gluck's own teaching experience, because it deals with a teacher telling the myth of Sisyphus in the class to indifferent and desk tapping students. The teacher tells the story of Sisyphus to students who don't listen. At the end of the poem, what we understand is the mountain or the achievement is a dream. It is an illusion. Still we pursue it. Let's read the poem. The voice of the poem is the teacher, as we mentioned earlier. So we have the persona speaking. My students look at me expectantly. I explain to them that the life of art is a life of endless labor. Their expressions hardly change. They need to know a little more about endless labor. So I tell them the story of Sisyphus, how he was doomed to push a rock up a mountain, knowing nothing would come of this effort, but that he would repeat it. So you know from this who is described, my students, a teacher describes her students. She tells them something. The life of art is a life of endless labor. Art, poetry or painting or music or anything, one devotes to the art one has chosen. It is an endless labor, no end to it. We have to keep on practicing. And in this context, to describe this endless labor, the teacher tells a story of Sisyphus. We have the myth of Sisyphus, here Greek personality who lifted a boulder from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill, but before he would put it on the top, the boulder would roll down and then again he would come back and then push it up, then again come back, push it up. This endless labor is a story that we can understand from the story of Sisyphus. Let us move on to the second part of the poem. Indefinitely I tell them there is no joy in this, in the artist's life, that one eludes judgment, and as I speak I am secretly pushing a rock myself, slyly pushing it up the steep face of a mountain. Why do I lie to these children? They aren't listening, they aren't deceived, their fingers tapping at the wooden desk. Here is the third part of it. So I retract the myth. I tell them it occurs in hell and that the artist lies because he is obsessed with attainment, that he perceives as a summit, that place where he will live forever, a place about to be transformed by his burden. With every breath I am standing at the top of the mountain, both my hands are free and the rock has added height to the mountain. Now we can see that the poet is aware of it, the teacher is aware of it, something like a lie that he or she tells the students. But then doing this repeatedly itself becomes something like an achievement, and that is why we have at the end the poet saying, standing on the top of the mountain, by repeatedly telling this. That is how propagandas are made. In actuality something may not be achieved, but when we say something repeatedly, we have an illusion that we have achieved something, we have added something to the world by our living here. Here is a thematic contrast. When we have a mountain, we also have a valley, up and down. We have the teacher and the student in the class. The teacher does something, tells a student, here is something you have to learn, and learn it for your life and you will find it useful, you can achieve something, you can get something out of this learning. On the one hand we have life, and other hand we have art. We live our life and make something of an art out of this life. We have a story which is imaginary, and also we have fact which is something we know to be true. We have joy and also pain. We have a teacher who speaks and students who don't listen. We also have the truth and also a lie. To cover up the lie that she has told in the class, the teacher invokes heaven and hell. Then we have attainment and failure. When we achieve something, we also have to understand the opposite of it, that is failure. Then to refer to this mountain valley, we have this summit, that is zenith, and nadir, that is the depth or bottom of the valley. We have to understand that this is a narrative poem of 31 lines. She simply tells a story. She shares her own experience and she reflects on her own teaching or learning from her teaching for her students and for herself. There is a story within a story, that is the myth of Sisyphus. The whole poem can be found in free verse, there is no rhyme scheme, the line lengths vary from one another. We have the common speech rhythm in this poem. The speaker is the first person I, and that I refers to the teacher. So we can say the voice of the poem is the voice of a teacher in a classroom where students don't listen to the teacher. So teaching or educating is a kind of burden for the teacher, and that burden is something unbearable, and she has written this poem out of that unbearable pain. We can also go into the linguistic analysis of the poem. The whole poem has many simple statements and assertions. We can see some examples here. My students look at me expectantly. I explain to them. There are some noticeable use of adverbs from expectantly, indefinitely, secretly, slyly. So all kinds of modifications are made. We have an interesting question in the form of, why do I lie to these children? A teacher lies to the children about the myth of Sisyphus. This is only one teacher. This may be a religious teacher, this may be a scientific teacher, this may be a political guru, a business guru. Anybody and everybody tells a lie to live their life. So in the course of the poem, we find the poet analyzes the life of a teacher in the classroom. To refer to the continuous movement of time, she uses present continuous tense. I am standing at the top of the mountain. And so we can say the poem is a poem of explanation, and we have some words which support our claim that this is a poem of not simply description but explanation. We have the word explain, so, tell, because. These words suggest that this poem is a poem of explanation. When we come to the literary analysis, we can see some metaphor, that is, teaching is a doomed profession. Our life does not have much beyond our view. We have the allusion to the myth of Sisyphus, representing the existential dilemma in life. Why do we have to live the same repeated life of boredom? We have the epigram, the life of art is a life of endless labor. We are born, and all our life we make some effort and try to do something to live our life. We have the repetition of I tell them 3 times. I tell them, but who listens? We have alliteration in some cases like a little more endless labor, the story of Sisyphus. We also have alliteration and assonance in one expression, knowing nothing, kn and n, knowing nothing. Even that sound nga, we can refer to it as alliteration. And of course we have that e, knowing nothing, as an example of assonance. Let us see some human relationships in this poem. Of course this poem is about a teacher and students. The teacher has certain professional obligations to students and to society, impart some education to students. However, the teacher also has certain personal obligations to herself, to understand what she does, to know whether she is doing the right thing. Even when she tells a lie, is she aware of telling a lie? So the teacher has a relation with the culture as a whole to perpetuate the old myths and also to create new myths to add to the store of myths. A teacher is an agent of society, perpetuating certain lies, bringing in some new facts. It is up to the teacher to continue with the old stories or to tell new stories, but then from different perspectives, from different angles, certain fact may look like lie, certain lie may look like fact. The teacher has a role to justify, in this particular case, the study of literature. Literature is all about imagination, not necessarily about truth. It deals with life, of course, but in an imaginative way. So we have to understand that education is a wheel and the teacher is something like a spoke in the wheel. We can also think about this poem with reference to life in general. All of us live a life of long explanation. Right from our childhood to the end of our life, we go on explaining what we have done, how we have lived. The whole question is, why do we do what we do? How do we justify what we do? All kinds of justifications and explanations we give throughout our life. But the whole important point that we have to realize is, do we question ourselves? Do we reflect on ourselves? Do we ask ourselves why we tell lies? And do we also think about some opportunities if there are certain course corrections that we can make in our life of lies. That is what the poet does, and that also may point to certain old myths, recourse to old myths like heaven and hell to relate that that is not truth. Then we have certain questions like, what is the nature of our contribution to the society that we live in? A teacher or an artist or a scientist or a doctor, a lawyer or anybody. This is only a representation, or it is only a sample of a professional life that we have in society. And then we have a serious question to ask, is our life or achievement a mountain of lies? At the end of it all, at the depth of it all, bottom of it all, what is life? Is it a lie? That is a big question. It depends on the kind of experience that we have. The depth of experience, if it is real, then life is real. If the depth of experience is very shallow, then that may not be real. Let us read the powerful poem of Emily Dickinson which affected Louise Gluck endlessly. The poem is called I Am Nobody, Who Are You? It is a short poem but a very powerful poem which influenced Glück deeply. I am nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there is a paraphrase, don't tell, they would banish us, you know. Society and individual, the poet and the reader. The poet and the reader become part of the society, true, at the same time they play the role of an individual reader and individual poet. If you tell them I am nobody, you are nobody, the society will not accept us, they would banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody, how public like a frog to tell your name, livelong day to an admiring bog. A bog admiring people who are great. What a lovely picture of people who boast of themselves we have here. How public. Remember, Emily Dickinson avoided public light. Louise Gluck also chose to live a life which did not attract much publicity. What are certain takeaways from this poem? Here are some which will help us to understand life. Don't stop with assertions. Explain what you assert or state. Tell stories by borrowing or by creating them on your own. Be aware of the lies you tell. That self-awareness is what is important for us when we read literature or when we read our life. Whenever there is an opportunity, course correct and help yourself. If not, you will live in a world of lies. At least be aware of it. Louise Gluck also has mentioned the impact of Shakespeare's songs on her life. One she refers to from the play Symbolic. There is a song which tells about fear no more, and I have modified it here to convey the idea of Louise Gluck. Fear life no more. If you know truth, you will not be afraid of life. Let us summarize our presentation. We saw the objectives of reading Gluck's life, writings, samples, and we also read some poems like Gratitude and Hallows. We went on to discuss The Mountain. It is something like an allegorical poem about the whole process of becoming a member of a society. We remember the teacher and the students in a classroom, how they mold themselves into members of the society with full of lies, deceits, deceptions. We paid attention to how the poem has been made with a theme, with a form, with some language and certain literary devices. This is a short poem, but then it deals with at least two important characters in the poem, the teacher and the students. It is all about the teacher, but then we have some response of students. The students don't respond, that's the whole idea. They are interested in their own world, they don't listen to the teacher. We also noticed certain reflections on life which are useful to us. We saw the influence of Emily Dickinson on Glück through that poem, I am nobody, who are you? We found certain takeaways from this poem, particularly learning about explaining with some evidences. Simply stating is not enough, we have to support our statement with some examples. That is what the poet does in her poem The Mountain. The mountain be a symbol of the mountain of lies with which we live our life. Here are some references for you. Whenever possible, you can read these references. I would urge all of you to read her Nobel lecture, which is available on the internet. You can see how she became poet of the vision, the dark vision that she has espoused in her poetry. Thank you.